Awesome. So I think we can go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone. My name is Signe Lynch. I am the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Specialist with the Maine Department of Education. And I will pass to Aubrie Howard to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aubrie. I work in the same office as Signe, the Office of School and Student Supports. And one of the hats I wear is foster care point of contact. And then I'll pass it to Allie, who we've unfortunately have been self-identified as the same person on Zoom.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Alexandra Cookson. I am the data quality trainer on the Maine Department of Education's data team. And my role is to assist with data entry and reporting of students, both experiencing homelessness and in foster care.
Awesome. So today we are lucky enough to have Allie joining us and covering some of the data pieces. I am just going to provide a couple of quick updates. So we have our upcoming McKinney-Vento Fall Regional meetings. They've gone out in our newsletter and some email communications to folks. I will pop in the chat the registration form for these. They are in person. We'll have a virtual option for those that cannot join us, and would love to see folks join us. They are a great opportunity to meet people in person from your local communities. We have McKinney-Vento Liaisons, school staff that support students experiencing homelessness, and as well as our students in the custody of DHHS join, as well as community providers. So great opportunity. If you haven't joined in the past, we would love to see you join your local meeting. Also wanted to share that November's office hours are going to be about access to higher education for foster care and McKinney-Vento students, and that will be with FAME and talking about FAFSA and financial aid as well. And in addition to the office hours that we are having with the Maine DOE, I just wanted to highlight that Schoolhouse Connection, our national advocacy and education partner for students experiencing homelessness, is also hosting a virtual FAFSA training in November that will take place on November 13th. And we will send those updates out as well. The other update I wanted to provide was that a priority notice on clarification surrounding LD 384 went out on Monday of this week. And this was related to preventing student homelessness. I know that there was some media articles that had gone out when the most recent legislative session laws went into effect, which included LD 384, which is essentially the continuation of the Preventing Student Homelessness pilot program. The biggest factor in that is that when this bill was approved, the funding was cut from a continuation of a 1.5 million per fiscal year to 125,000. And so the reason SAUs have not seen that fiscal year 26 application available in Grants for Me is that there has been a significant loss of funding. So we're really having to reevaluate how we would distribute that money. And we will provide additional updates in the near future once we have a solution to it. But just noting that that is a significant loss of funding for that program. And that is why an FY26 funding application has not been made available on Grants for Me. Okay, so shifting gears to why we have Allie and the data team with us today. Just want to make sure that we're highlighting some homeless student data and foster care student data, and that this data is collected appropriately at a local level so that we understand what is happening across the state and can accurately report this data to the U.S. Department of Education, which we do annually. And importance of data, this is helpful at a local level to make sure that you are aware and able to track students that are experiencing housing instability. You're aware of the number of students that are in foster care that you are serving, and making sure that we're also being able to report that at the state level, and that also can have implications for funding as well. So when we look at that state-funded Preventing Student Homelessness pilot program, that was looking at locally reported students experiencing homelessness data. So that's just a helpful piece too, locally being able to track these students and then making sure that is accurately reported in your student information system, which is why we are joined today with Ali to talk about that process and making sure that that data is being collected appropriately and reported accurately. And when we talk about data, particularly with the student information system and the coding that's used, there's the homeless code, but just making sure that we're mindful of the language that we're using in our conversations with other school staff and then families and youth themselves. Just being mindful of just saying experiencing homelessness, unhoused, just because of the stigma around that word homeless, which is something that we reiterate a lot in McKinney-Vento specific trainings. And highlighting that McKinney-Vento liaison teams really should include that partnership with the data manager as well to make sure that this is appropriately coded each year and reported to the Maine DOE. Definitions. So when we're talking about students experiencing homelessness, McKinney-Vento students, we're really meaning the students that are experiencing homelessness, and that's that definition of lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Reflecting on, can that student go to the same place every night, and is it safe and sufficient? Here are the definitions that are outlined in the federal statute. Please note that sharing housing due to loss of housing or economic hardship is the doubled up category, the most common situation that students find themselves in our homeless students experiencing homelessness population, and what we see coded as that doubled up. That means sharing housing due to a loss of housing or economic hardship. This also includes students that are living in motels, hotels, trailers, or camping grounds due to a lack of alternative adequate housing, living in emergency or transitional housing, abandoned in hospitals. So when a guardian refuses to pick up their child from a medical facility, a hospital, having a primary nighttime residence that is public or private place not designed for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, buses or train stations, and then any migratory student meeting the description above. So students that qualify for the migrant education program. And specifically, also wanted to highlight the unaccompanied homeless youth definition, which is another important piece to note for the coding and data collection, is that we need to know if a student that is considered homeless under McKinney-Vento's definition, are they also experiencing that nighttime residence without their legal guardian, without being in the physical custody of their legal guardian, is how we get a unaccompanied homeless youth situation, and where we would report a student as being unaccompanied under McKinney-Vento's definition. And that's another important designation to make when you're collecting data. Also wanted to clarify, so this is the McKinney-Vento and foster care office hours. So when we talk about students in foster care, we really mean that 24-hour out-of-home care placement where DHHS has made that placement and has care responsibilities. So DHHS is the guardian of these students. They are involved and making those formal arrangements and placements. It also includes those students that were previously considered McKinney-Vento prior to Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, when awaiting foster care was removed from McKinney-Vento's definition. And those foster care provisions were made clear about who qualifies as a foster care student and the specific protections that they have. Very, very similar to McKinney-Vento students, including rights to transportation to the school of origin, rights to a best interest determination. This can include students that may be in the custody of DHHS and may be placed at a youth shelter, where in any other situation, that student would pick up an unaccompanied homeless youth status because of that placement, if DHHS has care responsibility and has made that placement for them. It's just something to be mindful of, that these are two different student demographics. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Allie to talk about data entry.
Thank you. So data entry into Synergy. So Synergy is our state system it's a state student information system where we collect data from from school administrative units, and it's kind of a middle ground to where we actually are reporting data up to the state level that superintendents are certifying and reviewing. But we're going to talk about data entry into this system and what that's going to look like from what Signe was just talking about. Next slide, please. So this is Mystery Moose. He has been helping us with fall reporting this year. One of the things that I will note that is of importance is that over the summer, we introduced Mystery Moose as well as a new student information system replacement for that for Synergy. And that system was called Connect. And we have decided not to go with that Connect system this year. So that if you hear from your data specialist, your person who is responsible for reporting student data, that they are looking for Connect information, just remind them that Connect is not being used this year. We're still using Synergy for the coming year. So next slide. So here's that information. Here's how you can see what that looks like. So you can see where Connect would have gone. And if we hit the next slide, we can see that Synergy is coming back in. So here's how that data is going to flow from your student information system if you have one locally. Some school administrative units do have a student information system. It might be EduPoint, which is Synergy. Locally, there's two versions of it. One of them is housed locally at your school, and another is our state version. You may have PowerSchool, Rediker, Infinite Campus, or Web to School. And in a lot of these cases, the data is originating from that student information system and coming into State Synergy, most likely through an upload that your data specialist is doing, or maybe they're entering the data directly into Synergy. But Synergy is that middle ground where the data have to go into that system before it can go up to NEO, which is another system that we use for state reporting. And NEO is where your data is certified by your superintendent, it's reviewed, there are some resources in there, and I'm going to show you where you can find some really useful foster care data as well. Next slide. All of the resources that we're going to talk about today are located on our student data entry and reporting page under MEDM support. So our MEDM support team is primarily responsible for supporting Synergy and will be responsible for supporting Connect in the future, and they also support NEO. And so the data dictionaries have all the definitions of the terms that we're talking about today. Students experiencing homelessness, all of those codes are listed on the enrollment upload, also in the data dictionary for enrollment. And then there's also some enrollment guidance documentation. So you can see how to enroll some students in specific scenarios. Foster care is included in a few of those. Fiscal responsibilities, how to code students, what the different codes mean. We're going to get into what that means also in terms of students experiencing homelessness as well as foster care. And we also have some resources for homeless student information where you can see our guidance for enrolling these students specifically. So the legal language behind data entry, we use what's called primary nighttime residence to define students who are experiencing homelessness. That's those codes that Signe was talking about previously. So we have a double up code. They're listed somewhere in here, aren't they, Signe? Can you remind me what all four of them are? They're slipping my brain.
So doubled up, shelters or transitional housing, hotel, motel, or unsheltered. And so those are the four categories that the U.S. Department of Education requires us to report out on.
Yep. So we have those codes listed in the primary nighttime residence. There's also another code that is used to identify unaccompanied homeless youth, which is just a flag. It's a yes or no indicator of students who are unaccompanied youth. Next slide. So here are the data elements. So we can go into the next slide. So here's the codes that we are using listed right here. We have made an update this year. We previously had the term shelters, and we have updated shelters to shelters transitional housing. They have the same definition, they have the same meaning. It's just a change in the code name. As we were moving into our new system, it was an identifier that we noticed there. So in terms of those legal definitions and the legal language behind these codes, from the previous slide, these are the codes that you're entering into Synergy specifically, and they may look similar and should look similar in your student information system locally. So that would be your Power School Infinite Campus, Web to School, Rediker, or local Synergy. Next slide. So primary nighttime residence updates. A lot of times what we hear from our data specialists is that there's a change in a code, that a student is now had a change in their situation, and should they update the code? For federal reporting purposes, once a student has been identified as a student experiencing homelessness with a primary nighttime residence, the initial indicator is what stays with the student for the remainder of the school year. So in this instance, the student was identified on November 3rd with a primary nighttime residence of Hotel Motel, and they are still accompanied by their legal guardian. In January, the school was informed that the primary nighttime residence had changed to doubled up. In this instance, you're going to keep the Hotel Motel identifier for that primary nighttime residence, even though that student's situation has changed. So it always stays with what the initial identification of the student stays with them until the end of the school year. Next slide. In this instance, this student was identified in November, but in January, the school was informed that the student had found regular adequate housing, or fixed regular adequate housing, and the status still is going to remain. So even though now the student is not experiencing homelessness, for the purposes of McKinney-Vento, the student is still eligible for resources and services. And so that initial identifier of Hotel Motel will remain on that enrollment until the end of the school year, when the student is exited from Synergy. By June 30th is the end of our school year. And if the student is no longer homeless at the beginning of next school year, they would not be identified any longer. Next slide. In this instance, this is where it gets a little bit different from those previous instances. So in this instance, the student was identified on November 3rd with that Hotel Motel primary nighttime residence. And on January 3rd, the school was informed that the student was no longer accompanied by their family, and they're now an unaccompanied youth, and their primary nighttime residence has changed. So in this instance, the Hotel Motel would be updated to the new status of what the student was experiencing when they became an unaccompanied homeless youth. So the only time that a change happens to a primary nighttime residence is when a student has a change and becomes an unaccompanied homeless youth also. So in this instance, you would add the flag for unaccompanied homeless youth for January 3rd, and you would change to doubled up for this student since they changed status also. That's the only time that these codes would change. So in terms of best interest determination, Signe, do you want to talk about best interest determination in a little more detail?
Yes. So best interest determinations occur when a student has a loss of housing that puts them outside of your SAU's catchment area, or even your School of Origin's catchment area. So if you have a student that moves a few towns over, they're served by another SAU, we would want the McKinney-Vento liaison and that SAU of origin, so where the student was last regularly attending and enrolled, to communicate with that new nighttime residence SAU to conduct what we would call a best interest determination. And specifically in McKinney-Vento statute, we really default to keeping children in the school of origin for school stability purposes, unless it's clearly not in the best interest of that student to keep them continuing to go to that SAU and arranging that transportation. If it's in the best interest of the student to enroll them in the new SAU, new school of nighttime residence, then they would be immediately enrolled there.
Perfect. All right, so we can jump to the next slide. So in terms of how students are reported in this instance, something that often comes up with students experiencing homelessness is fiscal responsibility coding, which actually we have changed the term, even though it's mentioned in the law as fiscal responsibilities, the term for reporting has changed to residency status. And so the student's residency status would need to identify that the student has moved out of district. And what happens with these specific codes is they have to align, they identify where funding is going to go, whether it's going to go to the SAU of residence or it's going to go to the attending school. And so this is a really important distinction to keep in mind when we're reporting those students. And it's something to work with data entry staff in your central office, perhaps, or in your school office, whoever is entering the data for each of these students. This is going to be really important for them to understand so that when funding comes along, there aren't any surprises, because there's one of these codes that actually takes the funding and gives it to the resident SAU, and it means that there has to be an agreement in place that there's going to be a transfer of funds. So just keep that in mind. We're going to go through what that looks like in the next couple of slides. We can go to the next one. Perfect. So students experiencing homelessness should be coded just as any other student in terms of their they need a residency status, they need a resident town geocode, and those need to align with one another. So if you're using a resident of the school unit, let's say the student lives in district and then and they have a town that is within the school district that they're attending, that student could be kept with that code. The other option is that if the student moves out of the district, that they could be identified as code O, which is paid by resident SAU or EUT, which means that the other school district is going to be paying for that student's education. They're going to get the subsidy and it will come back to there would need to be an agreement in place that funding would be provided to the attending school so that that student could be you would receive funding for that student essentially. The other option is a superintendent's agreement, where a formal superintendent's agreement does not need to be in place for these students. These are really unique cases where a student is, if it's in the best interest of the student to reside out of district, you can use the S code without having to have a formal superintendent agreement in place because of that best interest determination. This is also true for students in foster care. So if you have a student who is out of district and the best interest of that student is for them to remain attending in the district of origin, then you can use the S code. You also could leave the resident town geocode as their initial identifier with that resident of SAU code. Both of those will work very similarly from one another in terms of how funding is identified. We often recommend not using the code O. So either the R or the S codes would be the best. And S is going to allow you to identify where the student is residing. We can go to the next slide. So here's kind of a visual of what I'm talking about here. So in the instance of code R or code S, the student would have subsidy, or the district, the SAU would have subsidy coming into the attending school. You can see my little $sign there. The money is coming into the school where the student is attending. even though the student is residing out of district. Again, if you're using the resident of SAU residency status, then the student needs to have a resident town in the district, even though they may not be living there any longer. That code doesn't drive any longer if the student's resident town is out of district. All of the school districts in our state have have specific towns associated with them, and if it's outside of the SAU, it will create an issue. But if you want to track that resident SAU or resident town where the student is truly residing, for whatever purpose you're using it for, you can use that code S to keep it there. You can go to the next slide. And this is an example of that code O, where the district that the student is residing in is going to receive subsidy funding, and there would need to be communication if it is expected that the resident district is going to pay the attending district for educating that child. So we don't step in, finance doesn't step in when subsidy is given to a school administrative unit, and we don't step in with how that funding needs to go to another district. So we don't necessarily recommend that code. We can go to the next one. Okay, so where to find this information? So there's two ways that this data gets into Synergy. One of them is on the state reporting status page where you do enrollment uploads. Those would usually be exports directly from your local student information system. So PowerSchool, Web2School, Infinite Campus, Rediker, or Synergy locally. You would be able to export a file, or your student data specialist would be able to export a file and upload it into State Synergy with all that information that is based on what is in your student information system. The other place that this could be entered is if anyone is doing manual entry directly into State Synergy. This is located on the enrollment tab. So under the enrollment for a student, you can see that there is a check mark for homeless unaccompanied youth, and then a homeless primary nighttime residence code. So it's just a drop down that you can select those codes. Next slide. And then another thing that I really want to talk to you all about today that I think would be really helpful. So as if we think back to the beginning of my talking here, I talked about the flow of the data from your student information system into Synergy and then going into NEO. Once data gets into NEO, there's this really great report that's generated of your students who are enrolled. And there's a resource that can provide you with information about the students who have been identified with a primary nighttime residence, as well as students who have been identified as foster care. So this attending student details report is a really great resource in NEO. And in order to get into NEO, you have to have an account. Your credentials are provided by MEDM support, and MEDM support cannot give you an account unless your superintendent submits an access request on your behalf. The access request is located under MEDM's support on our website. So there's a page for MEDM's support, MEDMS, and you can scroll about to the middle of that page and your superintendent can fill out that access request form on your behalf to get an account if they see fit to do so. In order for that to happen, we also have to have an active staff assignment for you. So if you're new to your district and maybe they haven't added you into NEO staff, someone from your district central office will need to add you as a staff member in NEO so we can get you an account. So this is something that you can navigate to once you're able to log into NEO. You'll see the next screen. And this is the main dashboard of NEO for you. So when you log in, you may have fewer of these modules up at the top. This is from my account. So there's a bunch of modules that you may see or may not see. And the one that you would need access to would be student data. Go to the next slide. And under student data, there's a section for student reports, which is accessed either in that top menu bar or at the bottom under where it says welcomes to student data. The bottom option will take you to the same next screen. And This lists out all of the reports that are due at any point throughout the year. If you really want to geek out about any of the reports that are coming up and what they look like, you can look at them here, but the one that you really want to see is going to be the attending student details report, and alphabetically, it's pretty close to the top of the enrollments reporting area. So we can go to the next screen. Once you open up this report, it's going to be a list of all of the students in the SAU, where they're attending school. It's also going to include student data, so be very careful with this. But what you can do with this to make it a little bit easier to work with is export to Excel so you can see some additional information. So we'll go to the next screen so we can show you where you can find that foster care. It's going to be all the way over to the right of this screen, and after you export it, you'll get a screen that looks similar to what you're seeing here. This is going across. I apologize. It's a really, really long report left to right. It houses all of the data that's been entered for a particular student in terms of their enrollment. And at the very far right of this table is a foster care yes or no indicator. This data is entered by Maine Department of Education based on data received from DHHS. It is updated on a weekly basis. I think it's on Tuesdays that we usually get this data. So if you start coming in here on Wednesday or Thursday, you should be able to get updated information about students who are in foster care. The homeless status and the homeless nighttime residence is coming from reported data that we just talked about previously, and that's entered into Synergy from your student information system locally. We are at some point going to move over to Connect. What Connect will provide for opportunities is an opportunity called SIF, which will just move data. It will take out some human interaction there that can be monitored by your student data specialists, and data will come into Connect where it can be validated. So if we're seeing changes in codes for students experiencing homelessness, we can catch that. So those are some of the things that we'll be able to do with the new level data Connect product once we move over to that system. So that change is still coming. It's just not here yet. We can go to the next slide. This is just another visual that it's going to be SAU level in which the data moves from, if you're using SIF, it's going to move all together for your whole district. We can go to the next one. We can skip through all of that. This is all stuff for your, we can stop here. This is perfect. So this is a little mock-up of what I've done to show kind of what SIF is going to look like. This is something that your student data specialists are also familiar with. So on the left side of the screen here, I have my mock-up of a student data system, kind of like your PowerSchool, Infinite Campus, whatever you're using locally. And so what I've done is just taken this student. Here is where I'm going to update my information. It might not have quite the same wording, but it might be pretty close to the same. And so I'm just going to label my student information here in my student information system. And then what will happen is SIF will do its thing and it will take it to the new student information system, which is actually a data integration platform. And you'll be able to see the student's information in Connect. So that will be something that your data specialists will be able to see, and they'll be able to monitor based on changes that you're making locally. So this is just something to keep in mind, that when we do move to Connect, any changes that you're making in your student information system in terms of state reported data is stuff that will be pulled up to Connect for state reporting. So if you're using your local student information system to maybe take off these identifiers, it's really important to know that these need to stay on once we move over into Connect. So that way we don't lose that data. Next. This is just a file upload situation. So some of the school districts, if you're not using a student information system, the data will have to be in one large file. So in this terms, it would be the student enrollment. And so it will all need to go to one compiled location where it will be uploaded by your student data specialist in one file. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, keep going. That's all data specialist stuff. This stuff right here is what you'll need to see. We'll go back one. Yep. So this right here is what the file looks like. So that's this is all mock data, but there's a column for homeless code and unaccompanied youth. So the homeless code would be the primary nighttime residence. Unaccompanied youth would be a yes or no field for students who are unaccompanied youth. What will happen is then once the data gets uploaded, it will go into a similar screen that your student data specialist will manage most of this, but just know that this is where those updates would come from. If they start sending you a spreadsheet that looks like this, the purpose is that this is where they're keeping the data. And next slide. And if you have any questions about data or data entry, we're always willing to help on the MEDMS support team, medms.support@maine.gov, or you can give us a call at 207-624-6896.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allie, for joining us and providing such a comprehensive review. And does anyone have any questions that Allie could answer just from the data perspective of what you're seeing in your schools and how you're reporting? All right. So I'm gonna just stop recording now and provide an opportunity for anyone that might have other situations that they would like to speak with us about broadly McKinney-Vento or foster care.